Hi guys, I thought I'd film this video as a bit of a transparent account of what it's like moving to a country that is often heavily romanticized and considered a dream place to live. I'm going to focus mainly on the north of Italy as that's where I live, and this is my perspective after 2 years living here. So, to start with, I want to preface that I'm 25 and come from a non EU country. I think this is helpful to mention because I notice most videos about moving to Italy are from retirees that don't actually have to work. They bring foreign money, investments, pensions, whatever. So, I feel they aren't affected by and don't cover a hugely important part of living in a new country, and that is the job market. So, I'm going to start by talking about location, geography, whatever you want to call it, as that is probably the most exciting part, right? When moving to a new country, is thinking, where in the country am I going to live? So, for most people moving to Italy, I'd say you are likely wanting to move to the south because you're coming for the good weather and the sea, right? This is all well and good if you're 60 and can just live off your life savings and pension. But if you're a young person, I would say moving to the south is actually a bad idea. Italy already has extremely limited job opportunities, even if you speak fluent Italian and you're from Italy. But this problem is even more exasperated in the south. So, to be realistic about surviving, you will most likely find yourself having to move somewhere starting at Rome or above. You also see this pattern of migration with the young Italians too, with most of them having to leave the south as the job market is really just terrible. So you see most young Italians and immigrants either moving to Rome, Bologna, Turin, or Milan. Like what you don't hear that often is Italy is the country in Europe with actually the biggest divide between North and South. Out of any country in Europe, and that is because the North actually has quite a strong GDP, but the South has actually really high numbers of people living below the poverty line, and really there's just no economy there. It's really, really impoverished the south of Italy. And so this dream, having to live in the north of Italy to find work, is where the Italian dream already starts to crack a bit because these cities are highly, highly expensive to live in, especially rent, and even more so when compared to the average salary. On top of that, specifically Turin and Milan have pretty awful weather from late October until early April. So you definitely don't see that sun all year round, warm vibes you associate with Italy in the places where there's actually, just enough work to survive. Honestly, in the north of Italy, I would compare the weather in winter to that of England that you typically associate with England or even the Netherlands. Like it really is bad. I live just south of Turin, so the area is beautiful between mid April until the end of October, and I'm surrounded by gorgeous mountains and nature. I'm 1 hour from the sea, and we don't really get much tourism, so it's still quite authentic, and the area I live in is mainly just Italians. So let's now talk about making friends and the general vibes of people in Italy. I would say for making young friends, you really have to live in one of the big northern cities. Outside of these, it is hard because there's not really many young people in Italy, and the ones living outside the cities have generally lived in that place their whole life and are pretty content with their friend group since high school or even earlier, plus their families. The cities host workers from abroad, Italians who have moved from other regions for better work prospect, and of course a huge proportion of international students for university, which makes the cities then the highest contender of being able to find friends. There's also a lot of Facebook groups in the cities for socializing and meeting new people, especially for foreigners. Of course, in the city too, you have more ability to make friends who speak different languages as you aren't going to become fluent in Italian overnight. I will point out a great thing about Italy is they do offer free immigrant Italian classes. So I go to this free Italian school 3 days a week, and these exist in cities but also small and medium sized towns. The one I go to is called Cipia or CPIA. But in general, Italians are cute, and if you try to speak Italian even badly, they aren't going to scold you for it. They encourage it, and it's a pretty good icebreaker because then they'll want to ask you where you're from, etc. And then you naturally start talking. The biggest issue with friendships in Italy, however, is just the utter lack of young people. And as we will discuss next, I think the biggest cause of this is the terrible job market and salaries, coupled with the expensive cost of living, particularly in the north where the jobs are. It's a bit of a trap, really, because the south is cheaper to live, but it has no jobs, and then the north has better jobs, but they're still bad, and the cost of living is considerably higher. I would say expensive. It's expensive. And due to these circumstances, Italy is one of the oldest countries in Europe, along with Portugal, where almost one in every four people are over 65. And you see it, you really do see it every day, just how old the population is. Honestly, in a lot of Italian cities and towns, the general vibe is just like people over 65 sitting outside drinking coffee. Like, you don't really see much else demographics. Um, this is driven by young people moving away, looking for better jobs elsewhere, and the birth rate plummeting since years ago, with no sign of improvement. In the last 10 years, Italy has lost 1 million people to moving abroad, and they're expected to lose another 1 million by 2030. And notably, the vast majority of these people moving are between 25 to 35, which is arguably the most important demographic, since they pay the taxes that pay for the pensions of a huge and ever growing population of old people. All right, so this is perhaps the most relevant topic for young people moving to Italy, but I also think it's the best explainer for why Italy's demographics is the way it is, and perhaps partially the mindset too. Let me just state the elephant in the room here, which is jobs in Italy absolutely suck. Like, there's just hardly any jobs, even for locals. Like I said, it's even worse in the South, which is why young people leave the South in droves. In the South, you kind of need to know someone to get a job, but even then, that job won't be in a big company with wage and responsibility progression. It will, be in a retail store or something like this. The north is of course a bit different. The majority of the jobs are in the north, like I've said, especially those in big companies and industries with career progression. But even these jobs are quite limited in the north too. But more importantly, the salaries are just so low, and it's also really difficult to get a long-term permanent contract. Employers often just sign you for 1 year or on a casual basis. So job security is also low. Italy has tons of highly qualified young professionals from super reputable schools in the country, but then when these people graduate, there's just a severe lack of secure, decent paying jobs to attract these highly educated people to stay. So you see a huge brain drain in Italy to its neighbours like Switzerland, the Netherlands, and Germany. And not only the highly skilled leave, but also the non skilled, because even as a barista, someone making coffee, you can make way more money in Switzerland or Germany or even France. And if you're young with no commitments tying you to Italy and with an EU passport allowing for super easy immigration to Italy's neighbours, what's the incentive to stay? You could be making coffee in Switzerland for 20 euros an hour versus in Italy for 9, and you're still sometimes only like 2 hours away from your family. I think it's important to mention that Italy isn't like the Netherlands or Germany, where you can move them and you can pretty easily get a job in a bar or a restaurant or a cafe that pays you pretty well, and they don't mind if you don't speak the native language. or if it will take you a while to learn it. Whereas in Italy, there's very low chance you'll be even given a foot in the door without already being fluent in Italian. So it just makes it a bit of a harder place to move if you're just looking to experience living there for 6 months or a year, because you really can't sort of integrate into the job market unless you're already fluent in Italian, which of course is going to take more than 3 or 4 months. In Italy, it's totally normal to work about 40 hours a week and receive maybe 1,000 to 1,200 euros a month. I have two Italian friends. One works in a beauty shop and one works as a secretary in an office of a big company, and they both work 40-hour weeks and they get 1,100 euros a month. And both of them talk all the time about how they hate their job and they work so much for such little pay, and that they'd like to find another job, but that even for them, being locals, they just can't find another job. Like there's just nothing available, especially outside of the big cities. And the thing with the Italian job market is because there's so few jobs, they also have a very old school approach to jobs. And it's like if you didn't specifically study or do a training course for this particular job, you can't get it. Like there's no such thing as transferable skills. It's just kind of like what you studied is what you get. There's not really much room for growth or taking a chance.
It makes you think, how is it possible to survive in an Italian city on this wage? The average rent, for example, in Turin has skyrocketed to around 7 to 900 euros plus for a month for a 25 square meter apartment. My friend, for example, lives in Bern in Switzerland, albeit not exactly inside the city center, and he pays 1,200 per month for 40 square meters. Um, the average salary in Turin is around 1,600 euros per month, and in Bern is around 6,400 per month. And in Milan, for example, the average rent is even higher, like 900 to 1,200 euros per month, and the salary is a bit higher than the average of Turin, but definitely not much higher, and of course, not even half that of the salary in Bern. So, at first glance, most people will say, yeah, but Switzerland is so crazy expensive. But really, with the huge difference in salaries, you can already see just how much more expensive it is comparatively to try renting in Italy. On top of this, one thing I find in Italy that I don't know how it is not considered criminal, but with real estate agents here, they charge you 2 to 3 months rent just as their commission for sourcing you the house. So you have to pay them 2 to 3 months rent that you'll never get back, plus the bond that is supposedly refunded, plus a month's rent to get inside. So in the end, if you sign a year's lease, you're essentially paying 15 months rent on a 12-month lease. And to make matters worse, it is near impossible to find a place without a real estate agent because they have this law in Italy, which I think is the same in all of Europe. It's definitely not the case in my country, so I was surprised about this. But landlords can't kick their renters out if they stop paying rent. So, as a result, landlords are very hesitant to rent their apartments long term and would much rather be an Airbnb, which of course exasperates the rental price hike even further. Therefore, landlords don't really rent out themselves on Facebook or wherever, which I'm used to. They hire the real estates to do the work because they will do due diligence on you pretty hard to make sure that you'll actually pay the rent. So all of this, of course, pushes up the price, and you have less and less power over the rental price. So in the end, the rule is, designed to protect the renters, the poorer people, but in the end, it just ends up hurting the average citizen more than anyone. Like, because you're paying like insanely high prices for rent, plus you're paying real estate agents these exorbitant fees for just finding your place. And then on top of it, these real estate agents are not easy to get a hold of. Let's just say they definitely aren't dying for your business. You have to chase them. Don't email, they won't reply. You have to call them again and again and again. And honestly, you really need to build rapport with them, and obviously in Italian, which is, of course, difficult if you've only just moved to the country and probably don't speak Italian. And this, of course, means you really need to be Italian to pass this paperwork or already have a job with steady income and your residency all set up to get past the due diligence of the real estate agent. And this is for sure not going to happen in 1 week, probably not even in 1 month, if I'm being honest. So, my perspective of this, or my observation of this, is because of this insecurity in jobs and also in the housing market, you'll find that people generally are very risk adverse and not exactly optimistic or willing to take chances. The government also makes starting a business in Italy very unattractive with high taxes, a lot of bureaucracy, which then adds to the already bad situation where people don't want their business in Italy, which creates less jobs, less motivation to be an entrepreneur or to innovate, which takes away that mindset in the country in general. For example, one of their most famous companies, Ferrero, is not even based in Italy, it's based in Luxembourg, where company taxes are much more attractive and salaries are around 3 times plus higher than in Italy, which is why I wouldn't say it's common among conversations with friends or even soon to be friends in Italy to talk about business ideas or dreams you have for starting your own business in the future. The mindset and goal, I believe, is much more focused on just finding anything that will give you long term security, albeit with a low salary. I, as you probably guessed, just got a casual job teaching English, considering I can't speak fluent Italian. But I think I actually got really lucky, and the school was desperate for teachers when I arrived because I got the job straight away, and the pay is actually quite good for Italian standards. I get 18 euros an hour before tax, so about 15 after tax. I mean, I have an Italian friend who's a beautician, and she makes 8 euros an hour after tax and works like 40 hours a week. I work maybe 15 hours a week, which I also think finding part time or flexible hours and jobs outside of language schools is also not very common. Now, of course, this wouldn't be a video about the struggles of living in Italy without mentioning bureaucracy. And for me, I find worse than the bureaucracy itself is the attitude of the people that work in bureaucrat roles. And so, what I mean by this is yes, it's true. Italy's bureaucracy is horrible and it's super, super slow. Probably the only country with worse bureaucracy than Italy is Portugal, or probably also Greece. But Italy is real down the bottom of the barrel. But more so than just how slow it is and how much paperwork there is and how many hurdles there are, I think the biggest problem is incompetency and the lack of information trickle down. I found when I went to register myself at the municipality I worked at, the woman there didn't even know what visa that I was showing her. And I was having to show her on the internet the visa. I showed her all my paperwork that I had from my home country embassy. And she even tried to tell me, oh, I don't know why the federal government would approve this. And I'm like, because it's the federal government and you're just, some little office in some tiny unimportant town. I don't know. I just found it very strange. Like, she was questioning the rules of the government and at a federal level. And I'm like, it's federal, so probably just go along with it. Like, she had no idea what they were, but she also didn't want to believe them or learn about them. And then she even tried to argue with me about saying I was lying from where I entered the country because I entered in Rome at the automatic passport gate, so I didn't have a stamp on my passport. And then she tried to say that I was lying because Italy doesn't have automatic passport gates, like just a lot of weird things. And then I told her my flight came from China. And then she tried to tell me that there's no flights from China to Rome or Italy in general. So just like it just gets weirder and weirder and weirder. Like they're completely incompetent. There's no transfer of information from the top down. And then they just try and come up with these weird stories like there's no flights from China. There's no such thing as an automatic passport gate. Just Yeah, I just the for me the worst thing about the bureaucracy was just how they like refused to believe things that they obviously don't know anything about. So yeah, that's the worst part I would say about dealing with the bureaucracy is no one knows anything, but they also don't want to learn anything or admit that they don't know anything. Of course, processing times are long. It's super normal to wait 3 months plus for your card to come. I, in the end, had to do a very Italian thing, which was ask around for the boss of the municipality because the woman that I had was just super unhelpful and super unkind and just again incompetent, and she told me that my visa doesn't exist and that you can't come without a work contract. And my visa, because I used a working holiday visa at first, you don't actually have to have a work contract because you don't actually have to work at all on this visa. So yeah, basically she told me to go away. And then I found out who the boss was of this municipality. We called in a favor and he said, okay, yeah, come back and I'll process the visa. I'm sorry. Like, a lot of the time, the admin people have like absolutely no clue. Yeah. So basically, in the end, he went through with her how to, do the application for this visa. And it turns out that all this time she just didn't click the drop down menu. There was a thing that said job, yes, no. The first option is yes, but there's a drop down for no. And she just didn't bother looking for the drop down menu. She just saw the yes and she was like, oh, I guess you need a job. So yeah, that was my experience, but that was only the first one. Like I could go on forever, but I'll save you the details. But yeah, that was just the first experience I had there, and I had to go back there 6 times. So you can imagine it gets very, very bad. And of course, not to mention, a lot of people go to the municipality with translators, like they have to hire translators because it is immigration, but it's only in Italian language. Like you can't even really speak French or English or any neighboring country either. Like you can't speak German, you can't speak French. It's just Italian. That is it. So you would see a lot of like the refugees coming from, common countries like Libya, Syria, and they all have to hire translators or lawyers, but I'm not really sure how they pay for them or if they get them pro bono, but that's something to think of. So, all in all, if I was to give my overall tips to young people moving to Italy, I would say you really need to look at moving to the north. It's just going to be super, super hard to find any sort of employment in the south. Then in the north, it's also going to be quite tricky to just find casual or part time work. Obviously, your best bet for this kind of work will be in a bar, but outside of maybe Milan and Rome, it's going to be really hard to find a job in a bar unless you already speak fluent Italian. Of course, you need to be prepared for the whirlwind of bureaucracy. You need to be with someone that speaks fluent Italian. You need to be prepared to go back to the municipality minimum 3 times. And yeah, just also be aware that your residency card might not come for 6 months, but that doesn't mean you're not allowed to live and work in the country until that card comes. You still are allowed to stay there. They'll give you a piece of paper that says basically you're waiting for your residency cards. But yeah, I would say those are the main things to think about. It's that Italy is not somewhere that you should go with the hopes of thinking you're going to make a career there or you're going to spend the year or 2 years, however long you're there, saving money while experiencing living abroad. I think if you're there to experience living abroad, but you also want to work on your career and save money, you can't really go to Italy. I think you need to go to the Netherlands or Germany, are probably the top contenders. So, yeah, I think it's just worth having this in mind that Italy is definitely a very challenging place to move as a young person. And I think that you should be coming here with not work in mind at all. Like, you definitely need to come with some savings, and your main priority of spending a year or two in Italy should definitely just be more the experience more than anything, because if you're coming here with work in mind, I think it will be quite disappointing. So, yeah, that is my overall view of the struggles of living in Italy as an immigrant, with my 2 years coming up soon. As you can imagine, I definitely don't plan on staying here for many years to come, mainly because, I really need to go make some money soon. So that will definitely guide where my next decision is of where I'm going to move to next. But yeah, thank you for giving it a listen. I know it's a bit negative, but I think it's really good to hear a realistic view on these kinds of things, just because it is a big commitment moving overseas, especially to countries like Italy, because the visa process is so involved. So I just thought it was worth putting this out there on the internet as, yeah, a young person that has found myself in Italy trying to work and having to work and, going through the struggles.